Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another MWO in Conversation with on a Tuesday night when, of course, we would usually all be gathering together and rehearsing. So if you're watching us live, welcome. Nice to see you all. Hope you enjoy what we've got to talk about this evening. And it's, of course, being recorded. It will go out on our social media and on YouTube. So you can either watch it again if you miss any of my jokes, which is quite possible, or if you're watching in the future, you're very welcome. A lovely interview tonight with a good friend of mine who I've just been having a very, very brief catch up with because of the pandemic. We've not seen each other for 9 months, possibly longer. It's getting on to possibly 12 months actually since I've seen this chap. So we've got lots to talk about. But we're going to talk about something very specific this evening. We're going to talk about music and the deaf. And my guest tonight is none other than Mr. Chandler, a superb trumpet player himself. I've played with him in many professional trumpet situations or professional banding situations. A first call for me for lead trumpet work as well because of his extensive range. And a jolly nice chap and a music teacher and teacher of the deaf. So we're going to have a little chat about Sean's life, career, how he got into playing, his outlook on music, his outlook on music education, and how he goes about teaching deaf children. So Sean, welcome very much. Thank you for agreeing to come on and have a chat to us tonight.
Oh no, it's a pleasure to be here. Play with you guys a couple of times. I've loved every single time.
Yeah, of course. And in fact, you've run a few brass workshops for the band as well, haven't you? And you joined us at the Phil for our 40th anniversary concert. And you've yeah, you've been sort of always been sort of somebody that MWO would recognise and appreciate having a bit of a more in-depth chat to you, because with a lot of these interviews, the people I talk to, we see quite regularly, but we don't get this opportunity to sit down and have a chat like this. So it's really nice to have you here. Could you start by explaining how you got into playing yourself and how you started playing a brass instrument, where your musical career first emanated from?
Yeah, sure. So, being deaf, I couldn't really listen to much speech when I was younger, and my own speech wasn't really brilliant because I couldn't access much speech when I was in primary school and before. And so I was always drawn to music simply because it was louder than speech. First and foremost, my dad always had Dean Martin playing Van Morrison, the Lighthouse Family, playing in the house. So I was always surrounded by music growing up. And then one day when I was in year 4, I was scribbling some stuff in class and I just heard this sound from outside the classroom. And I just put my stuff down and just stood up and walked out the classroom. Didn't tell anyone where I was going because why would you? I mean, a beautiful sound. Why would I want to tell anyone where I'm going? And opposite the classroom was the library where the trumpet lessons were being held. And I just walked in, saw the trumpet on the chair, walked over to it, picked it up and went, and that was it.
That's incredible because usually people sort of have to explain how to play a trumpet, but you'd seen it and you thought, that's a real draw. I want to do that. And do you think that was mainly because you sort of heard the sound of it and you thought, was that almost a way to help you communicate a little bit with your deafness?
Yeah. So like before, when I walked into the library and picked the instruments up, the biggest thing, and I'm sure we'll touch on this a little bit later, but the biggest thing on that day was the brass teacher, who Roy Eves is sadly no longer with us. He's passed on for quite a few years ago now. But he himself just came over and instead of kind of scolding me because it was his trumpet that I picked up, instead of like kind of scolding me, he taught me how to hold it, taught me how to breathe properly, form an embouchure and stuff like that. And then he had me kind of playing the note. I think it was Twinkle Twinkle Little Star in like 5 minutes. And so from then on, I had to have like speech therapy as a deaf child, and we're seeing quite a lot of speech therapy kind of coming into deaf education more and more as time goes on, because they want deaf children to be able to speak, even though it's more appropriate for them to sign. They want deaf children to speak more and more. And some people see that as a bit oppressive or whatever, but that's a whole other kind of realm for a different Zoom call, probably. Yeah.
Would that be speaking as well as signing, kind of simultaneously?
Yeah, the structure of BSL or any kind of sign language is very different to the syntax of spoken English. So when people sign and speak at the same time, it's a different structure to BSL. BSL kind of is based on reference points. And so if you were going to sign in English, for example, a quick example, if in English you would say there was a bird sitting outside in the tree, in BSL, the signs will be outside, tree, bird, sit. And I think when you learn a language, sometimes it's better just to focus on one language first and then develop from that, as opposed to learning two along kind of simultaneously. But certainly with myself and speech, my mum and dad wanted me to learn to speak from the off. They didn't want me to learn sign language really. That was just a decision that was made. And usually it is down to the parents of deaf children who make those kind of decisions as to what communication mode their deaf child is going to go for. And these are parents like my mum and dad who had never experienced deafness before. I became deaf at 3 months old as a result of meningitis. And my mum and dad, I was their first child, and they're kind of like coming to terms with the fact that they've got a baby, and then the fact that he won't hear. I think it was quite a lot. In the conversations since, my dad's kind of wanted. It's been really interesting, kind of getting their perspective on me as a teacher of the deaf myself now, because I'm talking to parents about the choices that they make, and so it's quite cathartic in some ways and therapeutic. But back to my speech when I was growing up. When you form an embouchure as a trumpet player, that was in case anyone didn't know.
That's how you do it. Free lesson. Great. It's as easy as that.
My parents found that because you learn to project, don't you? As a wind player, you learn how to. The other thing as well was that you listen to what you produce here. You listen to the outcome. And for me personally, I think I wasn't really too bothered about what sound I was producing through my speech, but because I had to listen and decipher where the pitch was and think of the muscle memory here, it kind of transferred to other parts of my life, namely being able to speak. So being able to say and think of mum and dad, they're married, they have a family. So different articulations in your speech lend themselves very well to articulations as a brass player.
That's very interesting, actually, because once I taught a speech therapist to play the saxophone, and we'd have incredibly interesting conversations about the inner oral cavity and the tongue position to voice notes and control the air at different speeds to then voice the note at the correct speed. And obviously, with a brass instrument, that's even more important because you've got to pitch the notes. But with a woodwind instrument, you can't just blow it the same all the time, because although the notes will come out, they won't sound very good. The timbre will be off, and the tuning will be pretty wild as well. So, when I teach, I don't talk about pitching like a brass instrument, but I talk about voicing the notes and getting the airspeed correct and getting the tongue in the correct position to speed up or slow down that air. And then, of course, the articulation of how you're going to articulate a phrase is very, very important as well. And what this speech therapist said to me was that the tongue is just a muscle, and it's an incredibly intricate muscle, and it can go around your mouth in all these different ways. And when you speak, your tongue touches inside your mouth all over the place, doesn't it? And I say to students, now just tell me what you ate for tea, and they'll describe their meal to me. And while they're doing that, I say, think about where your tongue is going while you're doing that. So if you can train it to do that, you can train it to single tongue very quickly, or for the double tongue, or ticketa for triple tonguing things. Not that we do particularly double or triple tonguing on a woodwind instrument, but I guess it's that sort of thing you're explaining there. Is it? That's the sort of thing you're getting at.
Yeah, I approach teaching deaf children when I'm teaching deaf children how to play brass instruments. I get them pretty much in the same way to tell me what they've just done. So I get them to listen to the sound that they produce, and then when it's a good sound, that they use on a brass instrument. I tell them, well, why is it a good sound? What are the things that you're doing now? And then it's not just in the sound that they produce, but it's also, there has to be something about the way that a deaf musician, or maybe anyone who's learning, the way that they own a certain phrase, the way that they embrace or embody their playing, and it becomes a part of them. That's the thing. My mantra is just think, and I really think that once you've got someone who maybe isn't very confident and can't speak as well as their hearing friend in class, and can't speak as well as the teachers or their mum and dad or the brothers and sisters, once they've got music and they can play a beautifully balanced phrase and the articulation's there, they're really proud of that, because they are producing something that sounds nice to hearing people, and what they produce maybe so far in their life sounds really ugly and muddy, and they know that. They know how they sound. They can't hear it, but from other people's reactions, I used to have this thing when I was a bit later on, when I was in secondary school, people would say, oh, I'm not. I think everyone compares themselves to each other when they're in secondary school, whether they like it or not. But I always used to think, if you give me a trumpet, I'll blow you out the water. It's just that. Probably the same with yourself and playing the sax when you do a monster solo over a chord sequence or whatever.
I think any child enjoys being able to do something that perhaps their peers can't do, and being good at something, isn't it? And having something to excel in is always nice. It's all, and whether it's that sort of really sporty, or whether it's sort of very musical or very arty or whatever, everybody has to find what they're good at. And it's, once you find what you're good at, it's a real life affirming thing, isn't it? Because you might not be good at some things, but you can do this,
Absolutely. But the expectation isn't for deaf children to be good at music. And that's a real shame. I think when you've got a brass instrument, and everyone that I speak to says vibration. It's not about vibration. To me, nothing replaces sound. Nothing replaces sound. When you think of the climax chords in the Nimrod, you can't interpret that in the same beautiful way as it is when it's in vibration. And there are things that you can wear. There's something called the sub pack, which is literally like a backpack, and through Bluetooth is connected to a music output on iPad or a phone or whatever. And you put it on, and it's used by deaf dancers a lot who can't follow the music orally. So that's great if it works for them. But the kind of moments that you have as I think everyone has those aha moments, when you're sitting there in an ensemble and you're playing, and it just comes together, and you think, that is the reason why we do what we do. Yeah, people need to have that experience. And I think once they've got that and they know that it's out there, they'll go rooting for it. They'll go looking for it.
Well, it's addictive, isn't it? That feeling is addictive, and it gives you all those endorphins that you want, and you want to do that again. You want to feel like that again and again, don't you?
Not just that, you want to pass it on.
Yeah.
We've experienced it, absolutely. And so, I want to pass that on to other deaf people, which, I'm sure we're going to talk about anyway. But yeah.
Well, yeah. I'm just wondering, from you, as a trumpet playing point of view, as you're playing your trumpet, how much of your sound do you hear as you're playing?
It's an interesting question. So it's easier for me when I take my hearing aids out. I've got a severe to profound hearing loss, which means that when I take my hearing aids out, I can just about hear a dog barking if they're in the same room as me. And with hearing aids, hearing loss isn't cured by any form of technology. People go for cochlear implants or hearing aids. They think, oh, it's fine. They're a hearing person now. They can speak. They can hear. It's nowhere near the same thing, because all technology, hearing assisted technology, I should say, is programmed for speech. It's not programmed for music. So it's easier for me to take my hearing aids out and not have all the static and all the overload that goes on. There are music settings, but they are abysmal. And when you play in a big band and you want to do, or you want to try and sound like Maynard Ferguson or this Wayne fellow or whatever, it just doesn't happen. But then, say if you're in a rehearsal with your wonderful self, or you're in a gig and you're cracking all your fantastic jokes, Phil, that you told 12 or 13 times before.
Yeah, they're tried and tested.
I can't hear them.
That's a real shame because they're good. I know from our playing together that when we're in rehearsal, you know, I make a real obvious effort to try and allow you to lip read what I'm saying, you know. And so we're going back to bar 43, and I'll tend to address most of the rehearsal to you, because you need to, if you've not got your hearing aids in because you're playing, you tend to rely a little bit on lip reading, don't you?
So anything above the top C or D, kind of two or three lines up above the stage, anything above that is kind of without, I can't decipher exactly where it sits, and that's where you speak to people in the section. Your brother Andy, what a rock, what an absolute rock. He seriously, and there were other things going on in my life the first time I came to Edge Hill and stood next to Andy, but your brother and yourself just brought me back. Seriously, I was going through a really, really low point. And I know I wasn't really planning on saying this, to be honest, because obviously I want to talk about me. This is all about me.
Of course.
But you've got to remember whose shoulders you are standing on in the music world, in your family line, and your friendship groups and stuff like that. Remember whose shoulders you are standing on. And so standing next to Andy was a real security for me. Because he was really honest with me and he was so supportive. He made me laugh like you. The Shotton sense of humour, certainly from the guys that I've met. None of them top our Doreen. No way.
No, of course not. Yeah, I mean, I've noticed when you've been playing, particularly when you play very high. I mean, this time last year we played a big band gig and we did the Tom Cubis arrangement of "Oh Holy Night," and you played the Wayne Bergeron trumpet part, didn't you? Which if anybody watching doesn't know that, check it out. It's on the Jazz Musicians Christmas album by Tom Cubis, "Oh Holy Night," and it's. Is it a super D he hits or possibly higher? I can't remember. It's absolutely.
It's an F sharp. I've never seen it before. I've never heard
the F sharp above top F sharp, isn't it? Yeah. And we did it on a gig, and I remember you turned around to the guys in the section having absolutely nailed this note out, and you turned around and went, "Did I get it? Did I get it?" Yeah, and everyone's going, "Yeah." So, did I get it? I don't know. I can't hear it. So, how do you manage to pitch so accurately and play so high when you can't actually hear what you're pitching by the time it gets into that frequency? You've no sort of idea of hearing it then, have you?
I didn't know I could, to be honest. I think it's it is muscle memory a lot. I mean, like, it's one of the little party tricks that I do when people talk to me about pitching. I take the hearing aids out and buzz "Happy Birthday" to them perfectly in pitch, and it is muscle memory, and it's about. I think you've got to have balls. You've got to just go for it. Like, Chris doesn't need to edit that one out at all. Like, but I think we all know what I mean. And I think that having that gumption. It's a really interesting territory being a lead trumpet player, because everyone hates you because you've got an ego the size of the stage that you're playing on. But if you haven't got the ego, you're not going to get the sound.
Well, there's an old saying, isn't there, that lead trumpet players are born, not made. And I think it's an internal thing, isn't it? And it's an internalization of where that note is going to be and what the pitch is, and then how fast the air has to go to hit that pitch. And maybe because you can't hear it from the outside, maybe you're internalizing it more from the inside, and that allows you to focus a little bit more. And I don't know.
One of the most annoying things, pieces of advice that I've had in the past in lessons or like in rehearsals or whatever has been, try and hear the note first before you play. Can't. Absolutely can't. Sometimes I'll play the octave because, like, if, I don't know if it's the same for woodwind playing, but when you play something the octave lower, if you play the passage, you can kind of feel what happened on the chops as the phrase goes along. It's quite easy for me to just put that up an octave and have the same kind of muscular propeller directional journey, if that makes sense, an octave higher. And that usually works quite well for me, you know. But
yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? And I know you do a lot of teaching. We'll talk a little bit about your teaching as we go through tonight. But you don't just teach deaf children either, do you? You have got a lot of work with things like the Youth Brass Band of Great Britain and things like that. So you're teaching a lot of exceptional young brass players who obviously haven't, you know, they're not deaf, they can hear what they're doing, and you must be quite an inspiration not only to deaf children but to hearing children as well, really.
that's very kind of you, mate. I think I had a really good grounding in brass band playing, and kind of like the nitty gritty of playing like double and triple tonguing, like we were talking about before. You know, my first banding experience was when I played with a church band, and my teacher at secondary school. You've met Bob Dean? You know Bob Dean?
Oh, I know the name. Yeah, yeah.
Torture and Fog.
Right.
Yeah, and so just by sheer chance, he's deaf as well. He wears hearing aids, or he's no longer with us as well. But he will give me things like he will give me advice, such as go and practice in the bathroom. Take your hearing aids out, go and practice in the bathroom because the sound will bounce off the tiles. And lo and behold, it works really well.
Yeah, acoustics are great in bathrooms. Yeah.
Yeah. So he was someone who really started to believe in the potential that I had, and I'll forever be grateful to Bob because he showed me how to be a musician in the sense of you're a team, in the sense of you're a leader, in the sense of and I'm preaching to the converted here, talking to yourself, but in the sense of you speak to the people first, and then the atmosphere and the environment that you create. Because the thing is, whenever I'm nervous or I'm anxious, I can't hear a single thing. I don't know what it's like for anyone else, but if you put me at ease, if I feel that we're going to work together and you're going to level with me on a phrase, or we're going to craft this piece together, I'll have a great time. I'll have a great time. If there's a conductor who's a bit of a dictator, who's really critical, just doesn't have that kind of connectivity or human touch, I just switch off. And I think a lot of people switch off. Might work for some people. But one of the real reasons why I love coming to Edgehill or to the Phil Shotton big bands is that you reach out to the human first. That's musical connection. And I think deaf people love or are beginning to get involved in music because of human connection. They don't have to speak.
Isn't all music about a human connection? Isn't that absolutely what the most important part of music is? You know, it's about a human connection and a communication to other people. You know, does music even exist if we can't play it together with others, for others? You know,
Absolutely.
and that's why things have been so tough for us all during the pandemic, because that one main reason of playing music, of being connected to other humans, is just not possible to do in a lot of settings at the moment. So that's been really tough. And I think you've hit the nail on the head there. The whole point of music is about making a human connection. You know,
Yeah.
it's more about the music and the connection to other people than it is about how well you play, or as long as you're playing as well as you can possibly play and you're improving on yourself, that's as good as you need to be. The only person you're in competition with is yourself. And if you're a bit better than you were a couple of weeks ago, well, that's great. And you know, we do this for the music, you know, and that's why we do it. I remember a couple of years ago, maybe longer, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I had an infection and I burst my eardrum. Do you remember? And we did a gig.
Yeah.
We did a gig afterwards, and my eardrum had just about healed up. But for a few months, I was deaf in my right ear, and went to see a musician's audiologist and what have you, and everything was okay. But I remember sitting next to you in a section doing a concert and saying, you know, my admiration for you has gone up tenfold, having found my hearing being impaired and then slowly come back to what it was. I thought, goodness me, that's incredible. But I was all ready to kind of embrace a new way of hearing should I have had to. You know, I conducted an NWO rehearsal after quite a few weeks off, and I thought, oh, okay, this is how I'm going to hear music now, and that's okay because you know, I'll deal with that. Uh, so you know, I don't intend to sort of suggest that I've any idea what's going on trying to play when you're deaf, but I can appreciate certainly the difficulties that are there, you know, and as if playing a musical instrument wasn't difficult enough. Anyway, to play when you can't quite hear what's coming out, or you've got a distorted sort of hearing of what's coming out of the instrument, must be tricky. And I'm really intrigued to find out how you would start off a young deaf child playing a brass instrument, how you approach that, and how they respond to being able to make a sound like that. And you know, does it depend on the child how well they hear that, or you know, I mean, I'm fascinated to find out their reactions, because I've only ever seen little photos of you with lots of kids playing brass instruments, and everybody looks like they're having the time of their life, you know, which I'm sure they are. So yeah, how do you go about starting the brass lessons with young deaf children?
So most of my work in this field has been through doing workshops with deaf children and young people. And the most recent one was where I met my beautiful fiancée, Jenny, at workshops in York. And the way you start them is you get them all sat round. One of the things with me, sorry, I think I just interrupted myself speaking there.
You don't need to apologise to yourself.
I'm sorry. It's fine. Let's just crack on with the show here. So where was I? Sorry. Yeah. Okay. Definitely. Yeah. Okay. Cool. So Music and the Deaf contracted me to go and lead some workshops on their behalf. At these workshops, that Jenny was the project manager of. And what you do is, first of all, you find a room that's acoustically appropriate. I think that's pretty standard. I am at a very distinct advantage, I think, because I'm deaf myself. And so there's very much a case of, he's deaf, he can do it. I'm deaf, I'll be able to do it. And I can sign as well. So I can have deaf children who sign and deaf children who speak and listen in the same group with me, and I'll sign and speak at the same time. I know I said before that the BSL structure is very different. When I'm in workshops, I sign the way that I'm signing right now, which is sign-supported English, SSE. It uses basically the same signs as BSL, but in the same syntax as spoken English. That makes sense. Yeah. So they'll all be sat around me in a semicircle, and it's very much like, we'll explore this together. I'll put a trumpet in the middle of the semicircle, and I'll just ask the kids, what's this? What is it? And the kids will all be like, oh, well, first of all, they'll say, oh, wow, he's deaf and he can sign. Oh, wow. Because usually deaf children aren't taught by deaf teachers. Normally, they're taught by hearing people who usually have some form of communication support with them. I'm signing to them directly, and I'm the teacher. And I think that's a real bonus. I'm very lucky to be able to do that. Anyway, so they all kind of start doing this sign and trumpet. And then after that, I'll say, what do I do with this? And then they'll be like, blow, so I'll pick it up, and then I'll blow, but in the bell end of the mouthpiece, and no, turn around. So I'll turn around like this. So it's stuff like that. And then I just blow into the trumpet. I don't make any noise. But when I blow, I just blow. There's no sound that comes out. And I'll just kind of go, do you hear that? Do you hear that? So I'll get them to kind of tell me. And then there's always someone who maybe has tried, an old cornet in the past, or they know someone who plays a brass instrument, and I'll just go. So I'll get that kid. I won't do it first. I'll get the kid to come up and do it. there were some wonderful photos that I've been able to share with the relevant permissions of the kids doing it. There's a video of me, again with the relevant permissions, on an open Facebook page called Deaf Connect, where I'm with a young girl who is probably about 4 or 5, pure BSL, doesn't speak at all. Takes me about 3 or 4 minutes to get her to play a nose, but the journey that we go on to get there is pretty beautiful. And the look on her face when she finally gets it, she feels it, she can hear it, she's got some access to sound. So that's just a heartwarming moment. And then from there, either we'll get I'll go and give some deaf awareness sessions to peripatetic music teachers. I did one recently in Bradford where they got me to go in and do that with Yorkshire Youth Music. That was brilliant. And Bradford's got like a really strong brass teaching cohort there, like the Yorkshire kind of way, and it just went down an absolute storm. So there were 6 deaf children in one school having trumpet lessons, and you have to go in once the pandemic's over to go and see how they're getting on. And they were all started off by me going in with the instruments, letting the kids have an explore with plastic mouthpieces as well, so I can see their embouchure and see what they're doing. A lot of them will sing, make the vibration, which is really interesting because without the mouthpiece, they'll buzz. But as soon as you give them a trumpet, they'll sing.
Yeah.
I've never understood what.
I've come across that starting clarinet players, actually, and things like that, and sometimes children will make the wrong assumption. You'll talk about how to form the embouchure and what you've got to do, and then when the instrument comes to contact, they vocalize it and I'm playing it. No, you're not. You're singing down it. So, yeah, interesting. And when the children make their first sounds on the instrument, does that? I mean, that's going to be the first time they've possibly, if you're not demonstrating as well first, that'll be the first time they've heard that sound come out of a brass instrument.
For some of the kids, it's the first time they've ever heard
a sound at all.
And I think,
incredible.
Yeah. I know I said before about vibration not really being a part of the process, but when there is something in the tactile nature of holding something here and then listening to it. It's a lot louder than speech. It's not something that they're forced to listen to. That's another thing as well. Deaf children in schools have one-to-one sessions and it's intense. I can speak through experience. It is intense. I had a speech therapist who will come in every Wednesday afternoon who would have cheese and onion sandwiches for her lunch. And then I'd have a steak, not pleasant. Anyway, I don't know why I told you that. It's okay. So anyway, so it's just a nice group, dead chill. If they make a sound, great. If they want to engage with it, great. If not, no worries. But it's been a nice time that we've had together. And then there are lots of different ways visually that you can encourage the buzz and change the pitch. So I use my finger and I just go up and down, and the kids, without the trumpet, will buzz up and down. Another way is to buzz onto a balloon, so they know that to make the vibration here. Or I will buzz onto the balloon, and they feel it.
Yeah.
So that's when I first started doing workshops. There was some support staff who would get the child's hand and buzz onto the hand. We're not really allowed to do that anymore, but it worked.
So that's a sort of feeling the vibration in the embouchure, feeling the actual instrument vibrate as well. And talking about the balloon there, what I've done with clarinet students is play the lowest note on the clarinet. So basically, the clarinet is just a tube. Like a trumpet with no valves, just a bugle, it's just turned into a tube. If you hold a sheet of A4 paper over the bell, not tightly over the bell, but just over the bell, sort of dangling down like that, touching the bell, and you play that note, the piece of paper will vibrate and you can see that vibration. So you can sort of see the sound, if you like. I would imagine that would work on a trumpet as well. because there will be vibrations coming out of the bell, won't there? There's not a lot of air coming out, but there'll be vibration coming out.
Never,
I don't
never.
know. That's one to try. You know, I don't know if that. I don't. You might see the paper move. You might not. I don't know. Definitely works with a clarinet, and you could also do a really nice trick with a bass clarinet where you drop a ping pong ball down the bell and make it float, which is really exciting. But again, that's probably for another Zoom call.
I'm going
Talk.
to get a ball and hold it above a tuba and just see what.
Yeah. If you take a French horn and you unravel all the tubes on a French horn, you'll be in a lot of trouble. One of my favourite French horn jokes, one of many. Talking about visual aids, do you ever use an electronic tuner in either your playing or your teaching to sort of show the pitch that a child is using or anything like that?
You know what means like you heard me play, and like I don't know if like in rehearsals I hate intonation and I hate tuning up, and I know that it's a very reactive process. Even if you tune up at the start of the gig, you've got to keep listening and you've got to keep kind of adjusting what's happening here, what's happening with the slides, what's happening with like looking after your chops. Ever since I started, no, actually, no, that's not true. Ever since when I first started playing in Liverpool youth brass bands, I'm not going to, I don't want to go into it too much, but it was always picked up on with intonation and my playing. I was a corner player and I was in a band full of trumpet players. I have no idea why. It wasn't like a traditional brass band setup. And I was always told, you're sticking out like a sore thumb, sort it out, couldn't tell the difference. And having that drummed into you when you're like 14, 15 years old, it was so bad. It was weird. I was in the National Youth Brass Band of Great Britain, playing with like the best corner players in the United Kingdom on a Saturday morning, playing with other other trumpet players, being told I'm wildly out of tune.
Yeah,
hated it. But yeah, I mean, like I'm quite good when I can see it going flat. I just think up. I don't really necessarily do anything. I just think of elevating. It just works. I don't really think of doing anything here. It's just a mindset of like, we're not there, we're there.
Yeah.
You know,
I'm just thinking more for students, really, you know, because obviously a lot of the tuners will tell you what note you're playing, and you can see the note move on the stave on some of the electronic tuners you can get, and whether that visual clue would help children who are deaf and learning to play. Whether that's a good tool to use or not, I don't know.
I wouldn't say like when the first. I just think it's really important to focus on letting them know they can do it.
Yeah, and
you know, just letting them, and we're there. Just a few little tweaks, and we are off. We're on it. And it's the same with writing the fingering underneath on the music. Some teachers have like this theory where don't write the fingering on, they need to learn the notes. I'm not too bothered about that. I think if you write the fingering on underneath the notes, the kid will think, I can do this. I've got it. That's the melody. And then over time, it'll just become a second nature to them.
I think a lot of time teachers put far too much pressure on the reading of music straight away. You know, sound of trumpet start on open C. There it is. There's the blob. There's the line. There's all your C's. Great. And you spend 2 pages playing various C's. You know, whereas actual fact, within a few minutes, you can teach a child to play 5 notes on an instrument, and then do it through an oral tradition, and say, right, we're going to play this, we're going to do that, and learn a few little tunes first before worrying about reading it off the page. Because, I know I don't start many young people off these days, but when I was teaching a lot of very beginners, they'd leave their first lesson and say, well, it's great, I've played 3 tunes. I've only had 1 lesson. I could already play 3 tunes. Listen, and they'd play their little 5-note tunes. But it was all done through sort of call and response and copying. And I always think you learn to speak before you learn to read and write. And I think that's the same with music, isn't it? It's you're going to learn by doing, and then once you've got the hang of that, you can think about, well, how does that look when it's written down, and why does that sound like that, and sort of line up that way. I think you're absolutely right. You've got to get kids playing, and playing quick, and showing that they can progress, and that it's a fun thing to do, because as soon as you can play a few little tunes, you want to play more, don't you?
I think the thing with teaching deaf children though is that you'll teach them something like Fairy Shaka or Twinkle Twinkle Little Star, but the kids that I teach won't have heard those tunes. So you kind of like saying to them, come on, you know this, everyone knows this nursery rhyme. No, they don't. They might have signed it in like a signing toddlers group back when they were, younger.
Yeah.
To actually hear the sounds, no chance. But once they've learned that it might take a couple of months for them to really kind of embody the sound, to really get involved with it and know where it sits here and with the breath control and all of that. It takes a long time. And that's where I think the patience and understanding of the teacher needs to come in. The teacher's expectations need to play a massive part in the deaf child, knowing that they're on the right path and knowing that every lesson won't be a struggle, because every English lesson, math lesson, science lesson, all the other lessons are a constant struggle, and they're intense for deaf children, and they're seeing their hearing friend in the classroom getting it straight away. So I think it's something that needs to be dealt with a lot of tact and a lot of human connection.
Yeah,
and that's all you need.
Yeah. That's a really interesting point, and actually, I feel silly saying I didn't even think about that, but of course, they've not heard those tunes, they've not grown up with that going on. Would you say that bone conduction plays a particular role in playing when you haven't got the same kind of hearing? And the reason I mention this is sometimes a hearing musician can get a bit of a false sense of the sound they're creating because of the bone conduction through the jaw and the sort of head resonances and the chest resonances. And the only way I've ever experienced this was one particularly aggressive lesson I attended at university, where my ears were folded in on themselves and sort of stuffed up and made into makeshift earplugs. And what that did was somebody sort of stood behind me with their fingers in my ears, and it allowed me to kind of hear what was going on inside my head rather than what was happening outside. So I heard a lot of kind of extra kind of noise and ringing and sort of, and it was all the bone conduction and the resonances and the empty spaces inside my head, one big one right in the middle, really, kind of vibrating. And you get a totally false sense of the sound. Do you find that any of that plays a part in what you're doing?
Whenever you're working with deaf children, I think you've got to remember that you can't express what you haven't got. You can't you can't be expected to give out, whether it's through speaking or through music, what you can't hear. So in the same way that you can't expect someone to be kind if they've never been shown kindness. So in terms of music and deafness, I think that with bone conduction, there is bone conduction hearing loss, but there's also hearing loss that bypasses bone conduction altogether. Depends on the etiology or the reason why a person is deaf. I've never had that problem. I don't think there's too much. And also, when a deaf brain is forming, the way that language develops, the way that the developments. And so I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I know what I'm talking about, because I don't in this particular regard. But the brain just doesn't work in the same way as a hearing person's brain. And so I don't think it would be exactly the same experience for a deaf person in that way. Sorry, mate.
No, it's just, it's interesting. I don't know, you see, it's interesting, isn't it? You wonder, and I suppose just like every student is different, every deaf student is different, and they're going to pick up on different things and make connections quicker or slower depending on the student, aren't they?
Yeah, and also the students' environment, whether they're introduced to music from a very early age, like I was fortunate to have a dad who loved music, and he always had music on in the house, to someone who has parents who hate music, has parents who don't communicate with, like on before when we were talking about the human connection in music. Deaf people, there's a very high percentage that they're more susceptible to, vulnerable to mental health problems and depression because of the isolation. There aren't many deaf people in the world. And wherever the deaf person is, they're usually quite sparse, they're spread out. There's not really a concentration of deaf people where they can all sign and communicate with each other. We've had things like the Prime Minister's updates for the COVID-19 pandemic, no sign language interpreter there. There is one now, but it's on BBC News 24. We don't have access to all of the information that's out there. And I didn't want to get political on this, but I did, and I'm going to shut up about it now. Yeah.
I think it's a very good point, and I think possibly we need music more than ever for deaf people, don't we, to help make that connection. And as we know from MWO, music builds community. And what better way to build a sense of community and a sense of belonging than through music?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm actually doing the music and the deaf and the National Centre for Early Music. I'm doing some videos with my beautiful fiancée Jenny. We're doing these videos for deaf children that are signed and that have subtitles, so there should be full access. People want to check them out and learn some sign language along the way. If you just type in, you've probably seen them, I've shared them here, there and everywhere, but if you type into YouTube, the National Centre for Early Music, I can play, or I can download and play. The videos should come up there. So have a look and let me know what you think. That'd be great.
Yeah. And you'll never see a couple with so much energy as Sean and Jenny. They're excellent videos.
After the videos, mate, we're exhausted.
I'm not surprised. We're going to do, there we are. The link is in the chat function. Thanks, Jenny. Which is great. There was a lovely article in the one of the brass band magazines that you wrote as well. Would you mind just telling us a little bit about that? Because people might like to check that out as well.
Yeah, I was asked by the British Bandman to do an article about what it's like to be a deaf brass player, and the kind of pretty much like what we've spoken about in some detail this evening. And then there's another article that I've written on a disability website called The Limping Chicken. And it's about deaf identity and how deaf people, there we go, there's my beautiful fiancée helping us out again.
Good.
Thanks, love. So she's an absolute star. But yeah, we've been very lucky to get those out there. And yeah, I'm more than happy to speak to anyone who will, listen. That'd be great. Yeah.
So before we leave tonight, it's been great chatting to Sean once again and finding out a little bit more in depth about your career in teaching deaf children brass instruments. I'd just like to touch back on your career. So you started in primary school. You heard this sound mainly because it was loud, and you went, what's that? Let's go and seek this out. You discovered you could then play this. You had quite a natural aptitude. It was the thing for you to be doing. And you said how you sort of progressed through school and played in the Liverpool Youth Brass Band and the National Youth Brass Band of Great Britain. Where did you go from leaving school? Where did you study? What sort of groups did you play with? And sort of what kind of professional playing have you done?
So I left school, went to the University of Salford. I was still with the National Youth Brass Band then. It was at the University of Salford that I met Steve Parry.
I know Steve well, yeah.
Yeah. And the Hollywood Swingers, by the way, oh my days, what a collection of top class musicians right there. Oh my days. And mate, I'm trying to persuade Jenny to let me have you guys for the wedding, but we'll talk on that another time.
That's maybe a private conversation.
So met Steve Parry, and then I was playing third or fourth trumpet in that on a cornet, which was hilarious. And then left university. BBC got in touch and said, come and do a gig at Buckingham Palace with us. So I did that. but that was Goldie's Band by Royal Appointment. The videos are still on YouTube on that Goldie's Band by Royal Appointment. We managed to bring a group of people together who have faced some form of adversity in life, and did a gig in front of Prince Harry at Buckingham Palace. And then I've just been doing bits and bobs, really. Was very lucky to guest with the Liverpool film as part of being a part of Liverpool Hull wind bands at the very, very start of their collaboration when I was training to be a music teacher at Liverpool Hull. And then what else have I done? Bits and bobs. To be honest, most of my stuff has always been with deaf kids, but I really enjoy just doing the gigs professionally, probably with yourself. You really have, I was never really a lead player. I did a bit with CJ's Jazz Orchestra, Chris Horn's big band, did a bit with them, but it was only really when I came to Edge Hill and to your support and Andy's kind of friendship as well, that I really kind of started to believe in I could be one of these big-headed lead trumpet players. So yeah, and then Liam Hardwick, done a fair bit of stuff with him with the Funky Doctors.
Yeah.
A few wedding gigs and stuff like that. But yeah, just kind of enjoyed myself. But like I say, it is more doing workshops with deaf kids and introducing music to them now. That's my focus.
Yeah, I think that's lovely, and it's once again, I've spoken to a lot of musicians over this lockdown period about their careers, and the one thing that comes through is how important it is to be versatile as you're playing and teaching and adapt to the situation you're in. And if you're going to make a career out of it, it is so important to be versatile and be able to have your don't put all your eggs in one basket, I suppose I'm saying. Be able to play in plenty of styles and be able to play and adapt to the situation that you're in. And I always ask everybody that I chat to, really, any sort of fellow professional musician and educator, I'm always intrigued to ask this question. And I'll finish with this, if that's okay, Sean.
Sure.
If you had one piece of advice to give a musician about playing and about their career, what would it be? One piece of advice to offer other musicians.
There is someone younger than you, very much like you, who needs to listen to you.
There we are. Once again, the human connection. What a lovely phrase. That's going in my book of advice from my colleagues. What a lovely phrase to finish this evening with. Thanks everybody for joining and watching us. A huge thanks to Sean Chandler for coming along and having a chat. And hopefully it won't be too long before we're all playing again, and Sean can come and sit in our trumpet section and play with the band too. Thank you all very much for listening. Thank you, Sean, and we'll see you all again very soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye, guys. Thank you. Pleasure.